Yeah. So that brings me over to the next subject, which is your speech at Yale University. Excuse me for not remembering the exact headline, but it was...
Oh, I'll help you.
Yeah. It was 7 principles for storytelling in marketing.
Very good. You got the numbers. Very good.
I got the numbers, but not the headline.
Okay. The 7 stories that rule the world and the world's best brands.
Yeah. Okay. But you did have 7 principles. You could say,
yes.
Right? Yeah. Now, when you go into a company, or whoever would go into a company and try to disrupt and try to communicate, the essential thing what you're trying to do there is to storytell in a different way, to create a new messaging. And I haven't seen all of the Mad Men episodes, but there's a cool thing where Don Draper says, and I try to quote him correctly, he says, "You feeling something, that's what sells." And I think that was such a great quote.
Oh yeah.
And that was also a parallel to what you were talking about, where if you are storytelling correctly, you are feeling something, and it's easier to remember. You were also talking about chemicals and stuff, but it was the feeling that was my perception after watching it. Could you give us a brief introduction to some of the principles that you are most fond of?
Yeah, interesting. I like your takeaway. Let me first address the feeling thing, because this is something I learned from Phil Duesenberry at BBDO. So I didn't work at BBDO, but I'd read something. Phil Duesenberry was a legendary creative director, one of the best in our business. And he said something that was really powerful to me, and I read this very early on in my career, which was, and this is him saying, and me paraphrasing. He said, "If I feel something in the boardroom, I'm going to feel it in the living room." And what I loved about that idea was that there was something in the material that we were producing, in our offices, after all the strategy was done, all the numbers and all the, inputs, that you actually had to move somebody. And that was really powerful. So I sort of put that in, I don't know, it was part of the ingredient that got me to storytelling. The 7 stories came about because a few years ago, before clients were obsessing over data and AI and whatever shiny object we're talking about now, the shiny object was storytelling. And I remember looking at there was a Google, a piece of data, believe it or not, from Google, that showed a spike in the number of searches for brand storytelling, like in 2006. There was just almost a hockey stick of searches that you saw that people were searching storytelling. Okay, that's interesting. So like I told you guys, I started out as a writer. I was an English major in college. I loved literature. I loved film. I loved stories. And suddenly I felt, oh my God, I can finally put this degree to work. Maybe there's something truly academic in storytelling. And I stumbled upon this book by a guy named Joseph Booker, an Oxford professor, Professor Booker, a 700-page book. So if anything, I will save your listeners from having to read all 700 pages. It's a fabulous book. But he wrote a wonderful book. And his theory was that there were 7 plot lines, that whether it was Shakespeare or whether it was Steven Spielberg or whether it was Sofia Coppola, you name the storyteller, they based the story on one of these 7 stories. And as I read this, I thought, wow, this is really powerful, just an interesting kind of exercise. And it struck me quite early on as I'm reading this, I thought, wow, what if you mapped these 7 stories to the best brands? Do brands themselves have narratives? Because what he was saying in the book and what some subsequent research I did after was that storytelling has been with us, encoded in our DNA as humans, back to the beginning of time. And when I say to you, let me tell you a story, just that phrase itself, something happens to you. I think there was a Stanford study, a University of Toronto study, and I believe a Wharton study that said that, there's a firing of dopamine. There's all kinds of chemical stuff that happens when I say that simple phrase, let me tell you a story. And if I do it correctly, if I have a beginning, if I have a middle, if I have a rising action, if there's a crescendo, that you come along for the ride. Chemically, you can't help it as a human. So that kind of alchemy of stuff, I thought would be very powerful for our business. And that became this presentation of the 7 stories that rule the world and the world's best brands.
And one of the, I call them principles, if that's okay.
That's okay.
One of the principles was the hero's quest, or?
Well, the hero's quest is really from Joseph Campbell, who did that wonderful work on showcasing that archetype. The 7 stories from Booker, and I have them here for us right now, are the following: overcoming the monster. We can talk about examples. The quest, voyage and return, rags to riches, rebirth. Those are 5. And then kind of 2 catch-alls of tragedy and comedy. And when you take those 7, there are certain archetypes within them. Overcoming the monster, this is biblical. This is David and Goliath.
Yeah.
The monster being Goliath. And this is something that somebody like Richard Branson, throughout his career, chronically overcame monsters. The monster of British Air, the monster of traditional record companies. If you look at the Virgin blueprint as a business, not just advertising, but as a business, they were chronically overcoming the monster to do something smarter. In the States, we have a brand called T-Mobile. It's part of Deutsche Telekom. I think they've been brilliant at overcoming the monster. Their monster is kind of, big, dull, and dumb telephony. And they have taken on the cause of the customer, and they're going to overcome all the monster that is the complexity of telephony. Quest is like any quest. When you think about say Lord of the Rings, the quest for the rings, or even Excalibur, the quest for that sword, and there are a number of wonderful quests out there. This is really the Nike blueprint. When you think about Just Do It, this is really about going back to if you've got a body, you're an athlete, and bettering your best. This is really a quest to be the best you can be. Tesla, I find, again, from their business standpoint, this is a quest to electrify the world, in every sense of the world. Tesla at its best. And I should go back for 1 second. Overcoming the monster, maybe one of the best overcoming the monster pieces of advertising ever was Apple's 1984. Yeah. Setting up, then, in air quotes, IBM, the man, and defeating that, overcoming that dull, crazy computer world with a personal computer, where I could, me as a lone person, could be the most creative I can be. That was a quest for the brand, and that film does it well.
But would you say that overcoming the monster is probably one of the easiest storytelling kind of like techniques? The David against Goliath, the underdog, the...
I don't know if I would use the word easy. I think it's intuitive, because I think as a human, we sort of are naturally born Davids, no matter who we are. We have there's always a monster to overcome.
Which of the seven are your favorite?
I like overcoming the monster because I like the clarity of it.
Yeah.
I like finding an enemy.
Yeah.
For brands, I think that's quite good. As a business, I like rebirth. As a disruption company, we're trying to, if you think about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, when the prince kisses Snow White, she's reborn, again. And one of the brands that does it well is Red Bull. When you drink the Red Bull and you are transformed and you have these wings in quotes.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we promise as a company. If you come to me, as a brand, there's probably something in you that we will, you'll be reborn in some way. We'll transform you either to where you were or to a new place that's even stronger than where you were.